so this is actually going to be a slideshow. Okay, the recording has started. This is going to be a slideshow. This is actually from one of the first few classes that I started teaching a while back. So you're going to notice some of the content that you might see on the screen might look a little outdated in terms of just the images. You'll be like, oh, that map's not used, or that doesn't look the same anymore, right? But what's going to happen is when I used to present this stuff, it used to be in the midst of the pandemic, right? So when that was happening, a lot of people just kind of either preferred or didn't prefer the slideshows. So it's up to you to kind of like let me know in terms of feedback if you guys want the slideshows back. Just because I know that a lot of people were doing a lot of indoors and they were just taking a lot of classes inside. So I kind of took that away from the essence of the classes. But if you guys want that back, do let me know and see how this kind of works out for you guys. So pathing. So what is pathing? We're going to be talking a lot about pathing. I noticed that a lot of players believe that just the movement from point A to point B is all they really need to worry about, just kind of getting to a particular location. But there are routes that you have to take. When you play a particular character, there's routes that you have to make sure that you are covering when you are playing a character. And what we're going to be doing specifically with this slideshow is covering the basics of understanding which routes are in general apply to most of the characters you're going to be playing, so you can have a general idea of what kind of role you're trying to play and what kind of space you're trying to make. Okay, so let's start with this. We're going to be, of course, talking about pathing. We're going to be talking about the differences between the pathing and attackers and defenders. And then I'm going to show you guys something called the 4-meter rule, 4 or 5-meter rule. Okay, depends on how you're approaching the angle, but it's going to show you guys how pathing can help you get into better fights. Okay, so I'm going to ask you guys this question. Okay, what is pathing? Does anyone want to take an anyone want to give me an example of pathing in their games? Anyone want to take a gander at it? Because I mentioned that it's just a route, right? It's the route. But what is exactly an example of that? Anyone want to take a chance at it? Lurking?
You
okay.
mean like building a path for you? Like you set up smokes, do like a Phoenix wall or something? I don't know.
Okay, that's one example of it. You can basically start creating a lane that you can kind of go through, essentially. Okay, that's one. Anything else? Anybody else want to take another shot at it? Nope. Entry pathing into site to gain site or retake a site. Yeah, entry pathing. Okay, that's another example of it. Perfect. Does anyone want to give me an exact example? So let me say, let's say you're Reyna. Okay. Can you visualize a pathway between you and where you need to go? Let's say you're entering bind. How would you visualize yourself entering into lamps, for example, or taking back sight? Those little examples are going to come into fruition when we learn more about pathing. So let's get started. Pathing in a nutshell, like I mentioned, it's the route you take. So we're going to talk about League of Legends for a moment. This is an example of how pathing tends to work for the jungle role. Okay, you're going to notice that the path itself is to go from one end of the map to the other, right? That is basically the route that they have to take. But the specifics of going from point 1 to point 2 to point 2 to point 3, these are tiny little subsets of that route that make you at your most optimal. And what we're going to try to do is, when we learn about pathing, is getting to that optimal position, making sure that no matter what we do, we're always at the right place, because the route you take matters. Okay, we got to make sure that when you are playing, you're making sure that in every single scenario, you are always prepared for either a fight or understanding where you need to go if something goes wrong. And when I show a video, there will be an example of it, a little scuffed, but there will be an example that you guys can kind of go through. Okay, so what is the difference between pathing and positioning? Okay, they do seem a little bit similar, right? When you think about positioning, you're thinking about, oh, I need to get to this place in order to be safe or in order to prepare for a fight. Routing, again, it's one of those things where routing will get you to a good position. It's that in-between period between you're trying to get to a good position and how are you going to get there, right? So in that period of time before you reach cover, for example, what exactly do you do? If you notice any particular player that's maybe Radiant, a pro player, you're going to notice that they're very particular in the way that they move, or you're going to notice that they tend to do things very similarly. Okay, so you can hold the right place, but the right that you take is essentially going to help you execute that position. So let's talk about pathing. There's 3 main lanes that we need to understand. Okay, looking at this picture just now, we have Jet, and there's 3 different lanes. Number 1 is the blue line. You can go straight across, just move straight ahead. We have the yellow lane on the left side. You can essentially start on the left side and maybe potentially move all the way around, hug the left wall. And then there's the right lane. You can basically hug the right wall over here before you get to your position. So what would the Jet do? Okay, let me ask you guys here. What is the path that you guys are going to use?
Since there's no enemies, probably the blue one.
Okay, blue one is one that we're going to pick. Who would say the yellow lane is perfect for Jet?
I mean, if you pop your dash, it doesn't really matter which one you take because you can just move to the next one.
Okay, and let's say that you had to come back in and take this lane again and you didn't have dash. Because you're right, Jet herself has the ability to make mistakes and be a little bit more aggressive. But in the general aspect of things, how would that change?
Probably yellow, because if it's the start of the round, someone's going to flash out probably.
Okay, that's a good one. Any takers for red?
Is there like a situation in like...
Yeah, it looks like it's a 1v0, so I don't...
Yeah,
or like,
for
what's
sure.
the scenario?
This is just approaching it maybe at the beginning of the round, maybe just in general. Think about the role of Jet. Jet is supposed to be taking fights. She's supposed to be taking point. She's supposed to be looking for more space. Where would you put Jet in the general sense of there's a team behind me, where would I go? Right? And that's what we're going to be
preferably blue or red.
Okay, blue or red. Okay, we have some reds. Why reds?
So she can be peeking wide and taking fights if possible.
Okay.
Yeah, and then you have your team, hypothetically speaking,
say like a
going
sky
yellow.
going yellow to like dog end hookah.
Okay.
So, yeah.
You could go red and then dash, and then to get back up to the hookah, you could smoke.
I see. Okay. That's one.
You can just bait
You walk up red because if somebody actually swings the hookah angle, they're going to be looking at market, and if you're on the blue line, you're going to be on that angle. So if you're on red, you're going to be on an off angle, and they'll have to hit the flick.
Yeah, okay, that's pretty good. That's actually a pretty good answer. Okay, overall, you guys kind of covered a lot of the different situations where each lane is going to be picked. Okay, so let's talk about each individual pathway so you guys get a chance to properly work with it. Okay, so I don't care about that. Let's talk about the red line really quickly. Okay, so the red line means that you're going to be playing aggressively. Okay, red line indicates taking positions that you're going to be essentially be moving in like directly into the line of sight of the enemy. Okay, think about it in the sense of an enemy is playing behind this spot right here. Think of it, for example, you're pushing a main, but for example, you're pushing out this little area right here, right? Whenever you're pushing out, whenever you are opposite of where the wall is, you are looking for a very aggressive angle. So we're going to look at it like this. When you're moving this way, notice how you're going to be essentially looking for a fight first. Okay, this is what the red line means. So for example, if it was inverse and the enemy was playing right here, then this would be the aggressive line now. Okay, red just would mean aggressive. Okay, there's an aggressive position that you guys can use to essentially push the opponent. Okay, this is what the red line means. Does anyone have any questions about that?
Nope.
Perfect. Let's talk about the next line. Yellow. Okay, yellow is where most of the players that are not going to be taking that fight, generally support characters, characters that are going to be trading, characters that are looking for an aggressive swing. Okay, all of these are going to be taking the yellow line. So if an enemy is going to be waiting right here, playing this position means that you are essentially waiting for an enemy to swing out, so you have an angle advantage in the form of an off angle, or you have cover to play with in case something goes wrong. Okay, so in the situation where Jet is going to be pushing up like this, we have someone playing over here by the yellow ready to trade. Okay, so if someone were to swing out, Jet is taking the first fight. No matter how you're looking at it, right, this Jet is going to be having, like someone mentioned, I think it was Jolty mentioned that we would be having that off angle, and this person right here would be ready to trade them out. Okay, this is where the yellow line really shines. So let's say you're an initiator, you're going to be looking for fights through this yellow lane. Last, we talked a little bit about that blue line. Okay, someone mentioned it doesn't really matter, just go through, right? Just kind of press W, kind of try to take this space right here. Try to see what happens when you push forward, right? Let's be honest, and let's talk about it this way. If someone is swinging out this way, okay, and they have no idea where the enemy is, where is the enemy usually looking to guarantee the biggest chance of success?
The middle.
The middle, okay? When an enemy does not know exactly where anybody is, and they're not really super aware, for example, of, a good example of this would be how many enemies are present, or they're not properly peeking, they're not angle checking, they're not doing any of that, they don't jump peek. If they're not doing any of that and they just push forward, their biggest chance of success are looking at the entrance. This is the middle, right? This is where most of the enemies are going to be. And if you think about it in the context maybe of the beginning of the round, you're going to notice that a lot of the time they just swing out and they look this way. This is why characters that are on the sides tend to be a little bit safer, and they tend to have an easier chance of trading the opponent. Okay, so when we're looking at that, we have mid. Okay, so with that out of the way, blue represents the pathway of just getting to point A to point B. This is essentially the line that you're just using to visualize the lane. It is very rarely a line that you're going to be using when you're expecting a fight. The blue would be just trying to get to point B as quickly as possible. So you can do this during rotations. You can do this while maybe, for example, you know there's nobody here. Maybe you know that you have an advantage because of an ult, any of that stuff. Okay. If you have any form of immobilizing utility, you can just use this line to move as quickly as possible, because everything else, as you've noticed, has some sort of purpose of playing slightly slower. Okay. Let's see. Okay. Does anyone have any questions about the blue line, red line, or yellow line?
No.
Nope.
No.
Perfect. Okay. So this is where we need to kind of talk about how those lines kind of fall back into the idea of context. Okay. When you're playing an agent that's aggressive like a Jet, you might be thinking, I'm always supposed to be looking at the red. Okay. Or if I'm playing something like a Sentinel, I'm supposed to be trading. I'm supposed to be playing passively. I'm always supposed to be taking the yellow, right? However, when you are looking at it in terms of just one-to-one, this is what this character does and this character might do, you lose a little bit of the nuance behind the positioning and the aggression or passiveness that a character might take. Okay. When you look at these routes, you have to think about the context of why you're taking that fight. Okay. So like I said here, right, agents that are supposed to trade or play safe should take a safer route. Well, if that's happening, why exactly are they playing here? Do they know that someone's going to be swinging? Why wouldn't the Jet just pick a safer angle overall, right? There's one of those things where you have to look into the context of different rounds and see what exactly is changing during the rounds that might potentially change how you approach the angle. So look at the context of how each individual round is playing. And then from there, you can make a decision. Not every single round do you have to take that aggressive angle with an aggressive character. Not every single time you want to take space do you need to pick this line, right? Just because a passive character can take this line right here, you know, you can, does that mean that you have to take that lane? Playstyle is also considered, right? You have to look into the context of all of these elements before you pick a route, okay? But overall, this is a really good way to just sort of think about whether you want to play aggressively or passively, right? Because at the end of the day, if you look at it in terms of how an angle is perceived, the farther you are from a particular lane and the slower you push, you might actually be able to catch maybe a little bit of their shoulder before they even manage to see you. And that is the And that is the extent, essentially, of how all of these things work with the lanes. Okay, so that's what context is. Okay, when we're looking into the difference between attackers and defenders, I need you guys to understand that there are two forms of ways of getting space through routing. Okay, the routing and the pathing. When we're looking at attackers, you're going to notice that they tend to look for as much space as possible. So because they're trying to poke for space and they're trying to gain space away from the opponent, attackers like to look for those aggressive angles. And this is what you see a lot of ego peeking, especially in your ranked games. It is a really popular way of getting that space. However, when you're trying to get that space, you get the benefit of getting an angle advantage. Very similar to what I talked about if they are pushing slower. And again, I'm going to represent it just with this little position right here. If someone is pushing and someone is kind of just holding this angle, the opponent might be able to catch the shoulder of the opponent and then prepare themselves for a fight. And this is where you might get an angle advantage. Okay, when you are trying to be playing for any form of attack, you're always making sure that you can look for angles that are deep, that are able to catch the opponent off guard. Okay, so this is a really easy way for defenders to kind of prevent themselves to, lose any easy kills or anything of this sort. Because what's happening is I find that in this angle right here, there are defenders that like to pick this angle. And as they push forward, they're not really ready for the fact that they might already be seen, and they just get shot and they die immediately, right? So as long as you're prepared for those fights and as long as you're aware of these angle advantages and disadvantages, you can make better decisions on which position you're going to be playing, because not only are you considering the enemy's routing, but you're also considering how they're going to get there in the first place. Okay. Okay. Defenders are a little bit of the opposite. So if we notice that attackers tend to have a little bit of the first push because of those aggressive angles, the opposite works for the defenders. In a position where they're all playing and we have 3 different lanes, you're going to notice that defenders tend to be a little bit better at finding fights when they are essentially getting either a really good off angle because they can't really be predicted, they're unpredictable, and they're getting a chance to fight the opponent, or they're able to use that aggression as essentially a tool to fight the opponent. Okay, so when we're looking at defenders, they tend to look for more passive angles. Okay, most of the time, off angles with good cover are the best examples of a good position that an opponent might take on the defense side. So what you have to pay attention to is you have to route yourself and make sure that when you're looking for those positions and you know an opponent is going to be waiting for you, maybe looking for a more passive angle where you know the opponent is going to be caught off guard will be a good chance for you to take the fight. And again, context matters. If you know that they like to ego swing and they keep getting that peeker's advantage, maybe that passive angle might not always work. And maybe that's why the off angle might be a little bit better. Or you can catch them by surprise by switching it up and you being the aggressor. Okay, just be mindful of that. Okay, so I'm going to take a breather right there. Does anyone have any questions on anything that I've covered thus far? I see someone typing. Anybody else while that person's typing? Nope. Okay. I'm just going to wait. Several people are typing. Uh-oh. You can leave at any time. There's absolutely no reason for you to stay in the class if you're not able to. Okay, so don't worry too much about that. Okay. All right. So let's talk about what happens after you've gotten yourself into the position that you want. Let's say that you've routed yourself properly and you basically, oh wait, someone asked a question. Why don't I have peeker's advantage even when I do? Is it due to bad routing? Okay. Ping is one of them, as someone already answered. It's a really good answer right there. Other things, of course, we're going to be talking about just the difference in angles. Okay. And this is where I'm going to be introducing the 5-meter rule. It's something that I just kind of noticed that just works for players. But the idea simply is you, for example, let's say that you're taking a fight against the X right there. And let's say that you've already kind of understood the basics of this fight right here. When you're approaching the angle, okay, you might not have a peeker's advantage just simply because when the angle is being held, you might have not been aware that maybe you approached it too slowly, or maybe there was more context to it. Maybe you made noise earlier. A lot of these things do apply to the routing that you're going to take. So let's say, for example, you start making noise. You're not going to take an aggressive angle where you've already been predicted where you're basically going to be landing. So I need you to be very, very mindful. Okay. Another thing as well is when you're trying to swing upon anybody that might be holding you, you might not have that peeker's advantage simply because, and you should always technically have a peeker's advantage when you swing first, but it may not feel like that just because they either already knew you were there, like I mentioned, you already have noise, or you picked a slightly less favorable angle. Okay. There will be times where even with routing where you think you are like going the right way, the farthest angle, it is not going to be the most favorable just because of things like, for example, walls, or for example, in the example that I was showing over here, there might be potentially something that's stopping you from swinging, and you have to basically lose a little bit of that timing where the opponent might just catch you off guard. All of these things do kind of add up into an angle advantage. Okay, so even with the consideration of, okay, I'm going to be routing myself this way, something might happen in which, of course, you might not feel like you have a peeker's advantage. Okay, the overall description of like all of that, of course, is just a matter of how the game is going as well. There's some things that we obviously can't control. Okay. Does this mean I have to walk every 3 seconds? Again, context matters. That would be a really hard answer to just kind of give you. I would say probably not. Okay. Let's talk about getting into the right position. Okay. Let's figure out exactly what happens when we reached the let's see what happens once we reached a prime position to swing or a prime position to fight. Okay. What happens there? Let's talk about the 4-meter rule. Okay. When it comes to taking a fight, okay, the best angle will always give you like a really good chance to fight, but there's some things that you don't really consider. Okay, you don't consider wall banging. You don't consider how your shoulder is exposed. You don't consider, for example, when you are already aware that the enemy is already looking at you. All of these things, there's a lot of things that you need to consider before you take that fight. So one thing I discovered is simply that when you are playing against an opponent that might already know you're there and you're both ready to take a fight, the farther you are, okay, the farther you are from an opponent, the slower you're going to move on their screen. Okay, that's just the nature of how perspectives are in the game. And this is something that I covered previously in a class. The closer you are to an opponent, the faster you are. Of course, it comes with the limitation of if they manage to catch your shoulder before you fully swing, then they have a chance of either predicting your movement, or if you want to get back into cover, you can get wall banged by one of the corners. Okay. So a good mixture of the two is to look at the 4-meter, 5-meter rule. Okay. I say 4 to 5 just because it might vary depending on the place. Sometimes you can't get a chance to play with those 4 meters. Okay. Essentially what happens is you're looking at an angle, you're approaching it. You can use the ping tool if you'd like. When you approach the angle, you're going to notice that the ping tool might give you a distance between 4 to 5 meters. This means that you are in the perfect distance for you to be able to properly swing. Again, you're trying to catch the opponent and swing them at like your optimal speed. But what's happening is not only is this speed good enough because you're not at the farthest point possible, but you're also not close enough that you're going to get wall banged. Okay. All of these are considered when you're playing in this angle. So all you have to really do to get into this position right here, let's say you're routing from the farthest angle and you know that there's an opponent right there and you're waiting for them, you can just basically get ready to take that fight and come to 4 and 5 meters. Over time, you'll start to get used to that distance. And you'll notice that sometimes you can take a little bit more or less. You might do 3, you might do 6. But at the end of the day, this is generally the range that you're going to be playing with when you're trying to take that swing. Okay? Let's see. See, how much time do we have? Well, we're almost out of time. I was going to show you guys in game, but just because we're running out of time, I do have a video that I was going to show you guys, but I think it's too long to kind of go through that. So what I'm going to do is save it for another time or just show it off the side if someone does get curious about it. Okay. It's a really old video, pretty scuffed. So maybe I'll hold on to it for another time. Does anyone have any questions about pathing? Does anyone have any questions about anything that you might have in regard to into the class? Or are we good to just continue? We're gonna be doing
think
a
we're
scrim.
good.
Okay, we're gonna be doing a scrim. If you guys are excited about that, hopefully you guys are ready to go. Big reminder: first come, first serve. And if we already have 10 players here, then I'm just gonna drop a party code, and it's whoever gets here first. Okay. Okay, let's get this class closed here and the scrim underway.